Good morning. I'm Terry Loftus, President and Executive Director of TACA, the Arts Community Alliance. Welcome to our virtual TACA Perforum Symposium 2020. TACA is a 501c3 nonprofit based in Dallas, Texas. Our mission is to support excellence and innovation in the cultural arts through grant making, capacity building, and thought leadership. Since 2009, the annual TACA Symposium Perforum has brought the local arts community together to dive into conversation about important topics facing the arts organizations. Past discussion topics include cross-sector collaboration, meeting the needs of the community, and the relevance of arts in our culture today. For 11 of its 12 years, Perforum has been led by Dr. Zani Voss, a longtime TACA board member and the director of SMU Data Arts, a National Center for Arts Research. Zani started her career as a theater maker and has now become a true pioneer in the field of arts research and a champion for the idea that true art can be harnessed to improve the health and vitality for the cultural arts. Today's symposium sadly marks Zani's last time as our moderator. Zani, we are extraordinarily grateful for your decade of leadership and your deep dedication to the arts and to Dallas. On behalf of the entire TACA Board of Directors, our staff, and the City of Dallas as a whole, we thank you. Before I turn this morning's conversation over to Zani, I would like to thank those who've made today's event possible. We begin with the Communities Foundation of Texas, a presenting sponsor of TACA Perforum since our inception in 2009. The Nasher Sculpture Center, for allowing us to stream part of today's conversation here on site at the Nasher as our longtime host of Perforum. Sound Ideas Production Group for today's live stream of Perforum. And last but not least, the TACA Board of Directors and our staff for making today possible. And now I'll turn it over to Zani Voss to kick off Perforum 2020.
Thank you, Terry. These Perforum discussions have inspired me and moved me more than I can say. Welcome everyone to the 12th Perforum conversation. Terry and I are streaming from the Nasher Sculpture Center. So I'm here in Nasher Hall where we're usually all gathered. I miss seeing you all in person, having a cup of coffee before getting going. But I am very excited to be able to share this conversation with you virtually today. I also want to thank Communities Foundation of Texas and Sound Ideas Production Group and the Nasher Sculpture Center. If you've not done this before, I'm going to encourage us all to do a quick chat storm. So on the count of 3, if you would go into your chat and express your gratitude and say hello to everyone. 1, 2, 3. Thank you to all of our sponsors and to the Nasher. What a year, and it's not over yet. You know, the COVID-related losses to arts and cultural organizations are in the billions. The murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, scores of innocent Black, Indigenous, people of color. It's ignited a real sense of racial justice and a push for equity, not only in arts and culture, but in society more broadly. And we're facing an election a week from tomorrow. And if you've not gotten out to vote, please do so. You know, it's a momentous time. And as the adage says, that crisis doesn't create character, crisis reveals character. And I know that all of you have a long arc of artistic vitality that you've created over the years here in North Texas, and that you have deep connections to the community. You are, though, out of desire, out of necessity, innovating, adapting, transforming in response to the current environment. So when I think about today, I think about what is the character of our organizations? You know, how are we transforming and thriving? And in doing so, how are we helping the North Texas community to transform and thrive? So we're here today to ask, our theme is Relevance, Relationships, and Reimagining. So what does relevance look like in the arts and culture field, given the landscape we're living in? How do we take advantage of this moment to deepen and leverage relationships with individuals and with communities? How can we reimagine our work to focus on what works best in terms of service to the community. Relevance, relationships, reimagining, they are inextricably tied. And yet we know this community has a deep sense of relevance. Yes, deep relationships, profound relationships already exist. We're reimagining now, but the conversation this morning is to say, how can we take it even further? How can we take this to the next level? What are ideas for the future for how we can ingrain success from here on out into the arts and culture landscape in North Texas? So we're going to spend time together on this Monday morning, hearing about approaches taken to go the extra mile in deepening, broadening, diversifying relationships, reimagining how to maximize relevance and meaning, considering which models work best, taking it from here. And as we say every year, no matter how much you know, there's always more to discover and to learn. So the panelists who are here with us today, they have a wealth of knowledge growing out of their deep experience in communities and in organizations. I've asked them each to take 12 minutes to share their stories and strategies for how they're approaching this topic in their own work. What's had greatest impact? We're going to have a musical pause from the Grays, and when we come back from that pause, we're going to have an open discussion. And so what I ask is that you think deeply about what is resonating for you. What are the questions that come to mind? What are the nuggets that you want to say, hey, what could we take, adapt, steal from what we've heard and make relevant for North Texas? We're talking about how do we continue to establish a collective vision for how to create a larger and deeper footprint for the arts here. And so I'm going to provide a very brief description of our distinguished panelists, and I'm going to ask each of you to just refer back to TACA's website for a fuller description. There's a link to the site in the chat. It's an impressive group, I think that you'll agree with me. We have with us Maria Lopez de Leon, who is the president and CEO of the National Association of Latino Arts and Cultures, or NALAC, which is based in San Antonio. She was appointed to the National Council of the Arts in 2013 by President Obama, and she was twice named among the nation's 50 most powerful and influential people in the nonprofit arts. Welcome, Maria. We have with us Kathy White, who's the Director of Finance for the Atlanta Opera. You'll notice that initially in the materials we had as a panelist, Tomers Valun, who is not able to join us today, but we have the great good fortune of having Kathy with us in his stead. Kathy is a recognized thought leader who manages the financial operations, not only by understanding the numbers, but the relationships behind the numbers. She's a former CEO of the Andrew J. Young Foundation. Welcome, Kathy.
Thank you.
And we have with us Deanna Cummings. Deanna is the Arts Program Director for the McKnight Foundation in Minnesota, which invests in the arts and other sectors to support that state's working artists and to advocate for the value of their work. She's also the co-founder and former CEO of Juxtaposition Arts, or Juxta, as it's called. It's a social enterprise business in North Minneapolis that trains and employs historically underestimated youth as a springboard to higher education and careers in art and design. Maria, Kathy, and Deanna have each imagined and reimagined over time the ways arts and culture can play a profoundly relevant role in communities that you serve, ever deepening and increasing relationships in the process. And so I'm going to start us off with you, Deanna. Deanna, in 1995, you co-founded Juxta, a nonprofit youth art and design education center, gallery, retail shop, studio space in North Minneapolis, and led it as CEO for 25 years. It's such a momentous success story in pushing the boundaries of what visual art and urban design can do for communities. Can you talk about how pioneering programs got started and what role do people in place play in the work? And what do you attribute the exponential growth over time in programs to? Deanna?
Thank you, Zani. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you. I'll talk a little bit about how Juxta came to do the work that we do today. When we started in 1995, we really looked like a traditional sort of after-school arts enrichment program. Arts and culture as a way for young people to express their creativity, and really arts and culture for its intrinsic benefit to young people's lives. Around 2007, 2008, we had been doing our high quality highly valued, highly recognized after-school arts program for 12 years. And my partner, who happens to be my husband, and our third founding partner at the time, looked around our neighborhood and said, we've been doing work that has served young people for more than a decade. High quality, hands-on, sustained contact over time through visual art and design. And individual young people are better off in our community. We can point to hundreds of individual young people who their involvement in Juxta are better off. But is our community as a whole better off? We've been doing this work for a decade, and is North Minneapolis as a whole better off because of the work we do? And the reality was that in some ways the answer was yes. We could look at the surrounding blocks where Juxtaposition bought property and renovated space over time and put space into active arts use. And those blocks were better off, but as a whole, unemployment was still higher than any other area of the city. All the health disparities that we can point to in Minnesota. Ground zero was North Minneapolis. A perception of high crime. All of the misery index statistics that are prevalent in our community are ground zero in North Minneapolis. So we ask ourselves, what more can our work do? And three things that I would point to that turned us in the direction of our core work now, which is training and employing young people in 5 micro businesses that we run under the umbrella of Juxtaposition Arts. We have a graphic design studio where young people are making logos, brochures, designing apparel, screen printed apparel for customers and clients. We have a screen printing and fashion design studio where young people do screen printing and design cut and sew soft apparel. We have an environmental design studio, which is primarily focused on the built and natural environment, architecture, landscape architecture, urban planning, and community engagement. And then we have a contemporary art studio, which looks like a traditional contemporary art studio. Our core focuses are ceramics, large-scale murals, and other traditional contemporary arts mediums. That work came about as we looked around our neighborhood and said, what more can we do? And recognize that our community of North Minneapolis has an abundant population of young people. Young people's creativity and genius is an asset in our neighborhood, whereas most people look at the high number of youth and youth of color in North Minneapolis and often think about it as a deficiency. Think about the young people in our community as needing to be contained and helped. And instead, we said, no, young people in North Minneapolis are an asset. How can we tap into young people as an asset? The second thing we noticed is that the majority of young people in North Minneapolis are youth of color, African American specifically. And we recognize that African Americans are the wellspring of creativity and genius in this country. Really, one of the original, if there is an original American culture, it is rooted in African American culture. So again, often, the genius that's abundant in North Minneapolis and the resource of African American culture wasn't being tapped into or viewed as an asset in our community. So that was the second thing we recognized. And then thirdly, we recognize that our city has a wealthy, rich, and robust design, advertising, contemporary art sector that is a multi-billion-dollar sector that had a problem and has a problem in that the sector doesn't reflect the cultural diversity of the city as a whole. So the sector was saying, we need more people of color. We are trying to figure out how to engage the next generation of professionals that will help our sector maintain its competitive edge. So our work in Juxta Lab sought to position the genius of North Minneapolis youth as an asset and an opportunity for our region's creative sectors, not as a please partner with us and help out these at-risk youth, but actually Collaborating, hiring, and partnering with Juxta is a good business decision because this is the future of your industry. These are the future professionals of your industry, and you have a resource right here in the Twin Cities where you can tap into the future. So those are the kinds of things I would mention. Getting clear on what the assets are in our community and then figuring out how to tap into those assets, getting clear on what the needs are in the broader arts and cultural sector and positioning our work as an opportunity to meet those needs. And then thirdly, developing an economic solution to arts and cultural opportunities is the way we've done the work at Juxta.
Deanna, thank you. It's really an inspirational story, and I love the framework. The idea of thinking about what are our assets, and then what more can we do? The constant question with respect to relevance and reimagining is what more can we be doing? Thank you for that. I know that we're going to want to talk about this work a lot more. Kathy, I'm going to move on to you now and to Atlanta Opera. I know that you've been part of the turnaround success story for the Atlanta Opera. How does the company approach relevance and relationship development? Can you talk about how you're bringing in new audiences, the impact and the growth of Discovery Series, and how the Atlanta Opera is serving the community through programming even during the pandemic?
Sure. Thanks so much for having me here, Zara. And hello, good morning to everyone. The Atlanta Opera has really a reimagined opera to the true sense of reimagining. We now are having our Big Tent series. What we have done is to take opera outdoors so that we have a kind of a circus kind of environment, if you can envision that. We have a huge tent that have the sides raised so that we have free air flowing through. We have doctors that are working with us to assure that all of our safety protocols are in place. And it's an entirely new environment for us because traditionally we've been in theater that would hold 3,500 to 4,000 people. And well, that will not happen this year. 2020 has shown us we had to reimagine opera in order to be able to meet the needs of our audiences. So we began by looking at what can we do differently? What can we put in place that will give the same great experience, but in a different way? We made it relevant to our community because we worked with partners throughout the community. That was our real hook, if you will. We did not do our new reimagined opera independently. We have partnered particularly with a local university here, Oglethorpe University, and we are having our series in their baseball diamond. So the relationship that we established with Oglethorpe led us also then to broaden those relationships to other universities. As I mentioned, we're working with Emory through the doctors there and the care there. What we have done in addition, as I move to looking at relationships, is that we established company players and studio players. I hear feedback. Is that from me?
No. I think it's in the room here. I think it should be stopped now. Sorry about that.
Okay, no problem. I just didn't know if I had done something incorrectly.
No, not at all.
But what we did in terms of broadening these relationships is that we recognize that there are many talented opera singers in Atlanta or in the Atlanta area. We have brought them on board as staff so that we have now company players and studio players, as we call those who were previously a part of our studio artist program. These singers now have a base salary that they receive. They receive benefits so that at a time when they cannot travel around the world as they did before without as many restrictions, they now have something that they can do that they love and be able to support themselves and their families in a way that otherwise would not be available. The company players and studio players that we have brought into our fold have been a diverse group so that we've been able to broaden our relevance as we look at those that we're dealing with throughout the community. So the relationships and the reimagining have worked well for us. As we look at how we become more relevant, we look, as you mentioned earlier, at the Discovery series that we have. Opera, as you know, has many times a stereotype as being very stodgic and very pointed toward one particular community. Well, we find now with our Big Tent series, we have younger audiences coming. And of course, we just opened a few days ago, so I don't have a long history to say, but I can tell you that we were amazed that those who have come out to a large extent have been younger than those that we have been seeing in our audience in the past. And what we've done is to bring in some students. There have been some very young people who have come in as well. Now, we do have a program that relates to the Title I schools here in Atlanta because we want to be relevant to the broader Atlanta area. So through our Discovery series and taking our program into the school systems, we have reached about 66% of the Title I schools that we have here in the Atlanta area. So we're reaching the low-income families that ordinarily would not have exposure to opera. And because it is a digital environment now, we're able to even have a broader outreach than before when we were physically going from one school system to another. So we've been able to take this pandemic and this year of 2020 that has left us so much in a turmoil and find successes in it and bright spots in it that have allowed us to reach out and partner with others. I want to mention too that not only have we been able to reach out and become more diversified as far as race is concerned, but even other cultures. We've partnered with the Consultant General of Mexico this year for one of our performances that we did earlier in the year. We also have reached out to the Bremen Jewish Heritage Museum. And as we're presenting an opera, Kaiser of Atlantis, we've worked with the Jewish community because they have at that museum, a huge repertoire and knowledge about the Holocaust. So we've had community engagement activities where we've brought that not only to the staff and to the singers, but the broader community as a whole to expose them to what happened during the Holocaust and the history. Through our EDI staff task force, we brought in Andrew Young to come and speak to all of us, again, some board members as well as staff and the singers, and give us the history of race relations, not only around the world and around this nation, but particularly the race relations here in Atlanta. Because we found that many of the people who are involved in our current group are new to Atlanta or younger people who just don't know the history of what has happened before within this country. So it was a broad learning experience that we've been able to accomplish. So through these avenues, we've kept relevant, we've expanded our relationships, and we have reimagined a whole new world that if we had thought about this in 2019, we would never have come up with a solution. But we've been responsive, and it's been a great success story.
Great. Thank you, Kathy. It really is remarkable how Atlanta Opera, when you see organizations that are seizing this moment to say, what else can we provide? How else can we continue to touch people, and be meaningful in the current environment? So thank you. Maria, you've had the leadership of NELEC for over 20 years, and in the process, it's become the nation's leading nonprofit organization exclusively dedicated to the Latino arts field. Can I ask you to tell us about your work and your guiding principles at NELEC, and talk about the current situation of Latino artists and arts organizations in the U.S. today? How are they reimagining what they're doing at this moment in time?
Good morning. Thank you, Zanny. My internet connection froze a little bit, but I believe you asked me to talk a little bit about the artists and the communities we serve and how we serve them. So good to be here with you, all of you. Well, NALEC is a 31-year-old service organization, the only service organization or intermediary for Latino arts here in this country. And we serve the field of thousands of artists and over 1,000 organizations, Latinx organizations, to help them stabilize and revitalize the work that is happening in Latino communities across the nation. In Puerto Rico also worked, is extremely important, and we support it through funding, through leadership training, convenings, and research. So building that network of relationships across the nation and beyond is extremely important to us. So we have been focused on leadership development for 20 years. We've convened a Leadership Institute. We have almost 500 alumni, artists, arts administrators, other community leaders that have participated in this training. And they are this next generation that is really leading the efforts and informing NALAC and of the needs of communities. We've created pods through small groups in communities to address issues, fund these little pods to address the issues in their communities. And I think right now, during the pandemic, it is just so extremely important to continue this work, to continue to build a movement, to continue to strengthen that network and weave all those relationships together. So in addition to the Latinx arts community that we work with, we also do a lot of collaboration and collective work and deep relationship building with other organizations. 4 years ago, we established, along with Alternate Roots, SIP Culture, First Peoples Fund, and Pai Foundation, and now we established the Intercultural Leadership Institute. And the leaders of these organizations and our teams, we have had relationships for 15 years, and really thinking about how we work together, what we can do together, how we can work toward a collective liberation. Together, Leadership Institute is another way where I think we will continue to build relevance, because we understand that we need to really know each other, trust each other, understand our practices, our traditions, and really begin to see each other as allies, because we cannot work in silos, and when we think about the work that we do, NALAC is guided, by values that really say who we are. It's about advocacy, about equity, empowerment, and it is really about accountability and transparency, and creating a network and this space, this place where we feel that everybody belongs and that everybody has something to say. And so we always build those bridges, but I think our artists, when we think about our artists and our organizations, our artists are creating beautiful, vibrant work, but so under-resourced. And we know that is true. The 2% of philanthropy, 2% of the funding from philanthropy goes to Latinx arts and cultural organizations and artists. And we know that is true for Black communities, for Native communities, and other communities. So it's extremely important that we do this work together to really begin to shift philanthropy and begin to create opportunities for conversation to really say, it's time to change that framework. It's time to really know and understand what is going on in so many communities, and to value that artistic expression that is being created by so many people. And during this time of pandemic, we started actos de confianza, or acts of trust. So we gathered a little bit of money together to support artists who were reaching out to us, telling us, I can't pay my rent, I have to feed my family, I don't know what to do. And so we created this small fund, as did our intercultural partners, the other organizations that I talked about that we work with. And so then we decided that we would go together to seek funding for our community. So we received funding from many foundations, And we're able then to share that funding and take it directly into our own communities. And then over a series of months between April and August, we came together and we were able to raise $5 million from the Mellon Foundation. And we shared that again. Sip Culture took some alternate routes, Pai, and we are supporting our artists and our organizations in that way. And so we are supporting the relief right now directly to artists and organizations, but we're also thinking about recovery. What do we do after this is over? And we have to really make that change within philanthropy and within community, within each other, to understand that things cannot just go back to the same way as usual. Things have shifted, things have changed. It is our responsibility to acknowledge that Black Lives Matter. It is our responsibility to acknowledge Indigenous people and their sovereignty and their dignity, and for all of us, to understand that, this and to really just work together. We all need to work together and address the racism, really, that has built the framework of how the arts are supported here in this country. And I think that is how we need to move forward and move forward together, and build trust, build bridges with each other.
Thank you, Maria. That really resonates for me, this idea of, how are you responsible to the full diversity of community members? This idea you can't go back, that moving forward is going to be a different reality, and whom will you gather? How will you be responsible to a broader scope of community? I know that we also have with us here today a good number of board members of arts and cultural organizations. I'm curious to hear your thoughts. What role does the board play at this moment in time? What responsibility do board members have? What actions can they take to help continue with the reimagining, with the relationship building, and with ensuring a sense of relevance for the organizations for whom they serve? Kathy, go ahead.
Okay, sure. Thanks. One thing that immediately comes to my mind, and we have a very good participative board that works with us, but board members have to be present. They have to show up. They have to not just have their name listed as being a member of the board, but they have to be engaged in the organization in total. This means participating on board committees so that you dig down into the details of the organization and whichever area is your area of expertise. You have to be willing as a board member to share your resources, because many times board members have networks and outside resources that would be invaluable to the organization. So having the board members share that would make a tremendous difference to the nonprofit organization itself. And then lastly, I think board members have to provide financial support, either through their own means or just through, again, the networks that they have available to them. By having a board member in more than just name only, the organization can thrive and have more opportunity than it would if it's just looking internally at the staff. So board members are critical.
Deanna, Maria, Deanna?
Yeah, Zani, I would add to Kathy's comments. I think board members are critical to making some of the tough decisions that we are having to make in our organizations right now. I assume North Texas is having the same experience or similar experience that we're having in Minnesota right now, in Minneapolis right now, in that our arts sector is experiencing a right sizing, so to speak, a shrinking, so to speak. And this right sizing that's happening needed to happen even before the pandemic. And again, I don't know for sure that this translates to North Texas, but in Minnesota, we had been riding on a bit of a bubble in the arts sector, a bit of a bubble in terms of the number of arts organizations, the number of arts venues, the scale and size of arts organizations and venues. And what the pandemic is forcing us to do is get clear about what our sector can truly support. And so there's a shrinking and a right sizing. And what board members, I think, need to do is take a hard look at our business models and ask, in a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, can our economy, can our sector support these number of organizations, this size of a budget? And I think that there's going to need to be some shrinking, and especially in big organizations. In Minnesota, it's the big, I believe it's the big 15 or so that are arts organizations that are $10 million or more. There's going to need to be a right sizing and shrinking, and I think board members have a responsibility to take a look at the business model.
Okay. Thank you, Deanna. Maria, anything to add? Any thoughts with respect to the role of boards?
And again, I think I finished. I heard what you finished saying, Deanna, and I agree with what Deanna and Kathy have shared. And I think that it's also, I have a board that leads their own organizations a lot. Do that community-based work, and I know that they're very active in NALEC's work and committees. And I think that for boards, also you need to look around the table, who's sitting at the table with you, and really see who is not there, who is not at that table, and who are you really, and who's missing in roles that you play on the board, but also the organization, who they're serving, and how you begin to shift your thinking of people as not just audiences, but people as human beings, and go into their communities and understand their practices and invite them into your space, into your place, whoever you may be, whatever organization you may be. You need to look around and see who's not there, because it goes beyond diversity. It's about equity.
Great. Well, I could keep the conversation going, but I know that we have an interlude coming. So far, I'm really excited and inspired by the ideas. All of the creativity research says that the greatest sparks of imagination happen when you're intensely focused on a problem, intensely focused, and then you take a little bit of a breather and you do something else creatively. And so with that, I'm going to turn this back over to Terry, who's going to introduce our guests.
Thank you, Zani, Deanna, Kathy, and Maria. If you haven't yet put your questions in chat, please do so. We'll be sorting through questions during our break and resume the program with our audience Q&A in about 5 minutes. And now, we'd like to add a touch of the performing arts to our program to remind us of exactly why we're here. The Grays are 3 remarkable siblings from Dallas. With years of versatile experience as talented musicians, Kiera, KJ, and Quentin Gray were all separately nominated for the 2019 Dallas Observer Music Awards. You may have also seen them on many of their appearances here in the Arts District at the Dallas Theater Center. Please welcome the Grays.
One of our favorite songs from our childhood.
Every day when you're walking down the street, and everybody that you meet has an original point of view, and I say, hey, what a wonderful kind of day. We can learn to work and play, get along with each other. You got to listen to your heart, listen to the beat, listen to the rhythm of the street. Open up your eyes, open up your ears, get together and make things better by working together. It's a simple message and it comes from the heart. Come and let's play together in the bright shiny weather. Let's all go to Gullah Gullah Island. Lots to see and to do here, here. Your friends calling you here. Let's all go to Gullah Gullah Island. Just put your foot in your hand. That means hurry up. Don't miss the fun that we planned. Oh, come and let's play together in the bright shiny weather. Let's all go to Gullah Gullah Island. You got to listen to your heart, listen to the beat, listen to the rhythm of the street. Open up your eyes, open up your ears, get together and make things better by working together. It's a simple message and it comes from the heart. Believe in yourself, for that's the place to start. And I said, hey, what a wonderful kind of day where we can learn to work and play and get along with each other. And I said, hey, what a wonderful kind of day where we can learn to work and play and get along with each other. What a wonderful kind of day. 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 What a wonderful kind of day.
Weren't they fabulous? In the chat, please give it up for the Grays. Thank you so much for a bit of inspiration and a lot of joy at a moment like this. I'd like to invite our panelists to come back, and I'd like to open up the floor to questions. So I also want to invite the panelists to be able to speak to and respond to one another. So much of what you said resonated for me, but I also want to make sure that we give folks a chance to pose questions of their own. But I want to get us started with one question. Everybody, please do feel free to submit your thoughts, to submit your comments as well. Are there essential elements that reside outside of the nucleus of the arts and cultural community itself, other aspects of a city that most help or hinder the relevance of arts and culture? Like what broader community pieces help to facilitate the arts relevance? And perhaps in some cases this may mean with respect to relationships, but any thoughts or response given your work of what are those elements of society that come in to help the arts kind of raise the tide for arts and culture within a city?
Well, I can just start to say that opera, of course, is very collaborative. So that with a single performance, we might be bringing in not only singers, the orchestra musicians, costume designers, set designers, wig and hair and makeup individuals. We have collaborations. So anytime we put on a performance, it is truly a collaborative effort that involves various segments of the community. So what we do is look at what provides a win-win, not only for the opera, but for those that are in our community that we're trying to bring into this picture as well and partner with and have the collaboration. So that's a short answer that I would give. From our standpoint, it's reaching out to all segments of the community and then looking to see what makes for a reasonable win-win to bring them into the opera experience.
Deanna, any thoughts to say?
Sure. I would just share that one of the things I think we're particularly good at in Minnesota and could stand to continue to grow and get better at, is really positioning the arts as an economic development and a community development tool. Case in point, 10 years ago, the citizens of Minnesota passed the Legacy Amendment Act, and that was a tax, a percent tax that supports the arts and the environment, which created a new pool of government support for the arts in Minnesota, which actually made us now the highest per capita investment in the arts of any other state in the country, higher than New York as well. But the reason that was able to pass is because artists came together with environmentalists and made the case that arts and culture makes Minnesota better, more economically vibrant, and folks were convinced. We just had a bonding bill passed, the biggest bonding bill ever in the history of the state of Minnesota, to support facilities for arts and culture organizations. A big piece of the bonding was to improve buildings and facilities. And again, the positioning was, this is an economic development activity. This is going to put people to work. Juxta was one of the organizations in the bonding bill, and they talked about the fact that Juxta employs 100 people every year. Those jobs are important to create and maintain. So really making the economic case, I think, is critically important.
Great, thank you, Deanna.
And I agree with you, Deanne. It's so important. The arts contribute so much to the economy locally and regionally, nationally. And I think that also that as a community, I think needs together of who we are. And really, artists and the arts really create that moral fabric of society. And I think that needs to be appreciated. And we reach out, to many sectors, whether it's the educational sector, or housing, or any other transportation, to really try to build a better understanding of why the arts are so important, that they are not just a frill, but they are an important part of who we are, of who our children are, that they get to understand that they also matter, that they understand their traditions. And I really think that is a critical part, So if the housing, let's say the housing authority in your city, in your community, I think with a better understanding of the arts, you create more conversation and begin to have conversations about not displacing people, and as they're building communities, that there's opportunities and spaces in these in communities for people to go to and practice art and build, and that the artists have such a vital role to play in building our communities.
Right. So here in the economic development, social cohesion, artistic expression, and how that can be supported from different mechanisms outside of the arts organizations themselves. We have a question from Katie Nicholson. She says, it's very hard to get a plan in place when organizations are forced to follow city, county, and state laws on gathering. How should we go about presenting these plans to the board and the public without making any promises? Any thoughts to share? Any response to Katie's question? It's a difficult time knowing how do you move forward and not move forward at the same time, knowing that for best of intentions, you may or may not be able to carry forth the plans.
I will speak up to say what we have had to do here in Atlanta, particularly because we are having live performances in the middle of the pandemic. For us, what we did was to make safety our number one goal. So we have invested a lot of money as well as a lot of time in determining what would make it safe for the community at large. And that we had to stick with. I had mentioned prior to our coming on air with the show that with this particular panel discussion, that we had a performance that was canceled on Saturday night. for that reason, that we had goals, we had structure in place to say we are going to provide a safe environment to the community. So though we had planned to perform in a tent that had the sides raised so that air was flowing through, the rain was coming down so heavily that we had to lower the sides of the tent. Well, once we did that, we were no longer in a safe environment. So we canceled the show. It means that when you set in place a goal of what you're going to do, you have to stick to that goal and that priority. And then be willing to be flexible and adjust as you can. But when you have that goal, stick to it, and your audience, your community, those that you're serving and reach out to will respect that.
Deanna, any thoughts?
Yeah, I just agree. I was thinking as you asked the question, as Kathy was answering, that both at McKnight and at Juxta during the pandemic, we've thought about frames of time as short term, short midterm, and then short long term. So it's a 30-day, a 60-day, and a 90-day. And then we're revisiting those plans week to week, and have found that donors and funders and audience members understand, they get it, just as Kathy said. We had to cancel our big annual fundraiser at Juxta, which is a highly tactile and interactive event, circus-like, actually. I mean, we had to cancel it, and nobody asked for a refund. Everybody said, take the money, keep the money, we'll see you next year. So I just think that sort of newfound flexibility that we've had to discover and rely on over the past 9 months or so is something that we need to carry over with us into the future, is that resiliency and flexibility and ability to adapt.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And we're in the middle of a culture shift, and we need to be able to find a way to work during this time, and looking into the future. And we had our Advocacy Leadership Institute, our NAWAC Summer Institute. We held all of those virtually, and we invested in making sure that we had the technology, and that some of our artists and organizations who needed that also bolstered their technology to be able to continue programming virtually. And I think that we need to explore this, and I think the very first thing we need to do is to take into account the safety of society, the safety of our communities, and while, yes, we miss the in-person convenings, things have shifted, things have changed, and how do we begin to think differently? It may be that in my organization, maybe we'll have a smaller number of people working inside an office, and most of them will be working remotely. I think things have worked for us right now, and I think that we need to start thinking about something different. What are you going to do with all those seats in a big in a big building, in a big institution? How are you going to think differently about how you work with people, how you work with community?
Yeah.
And Maria, and your point made me think of another point, which is we actually maybe need to do less, right? And I feel like that's like a big aha, because as arts organizations, as folks who are trying to make the world a better place, the idea that we're just going to adapt and use different platforms and use technology and do the same amount of things that we've been doing, I think to your point, there's a shift happening, and we have to lean into the shift. And part of that shift is not doing as much, slowing down a little bit. Maybe we typically did 10 shows a year. Maybe in the new normal that we're building, maybe we do 5 or 7. So I think just getting used to doing less, I think, is also a thing that we need to take into consideration. And to the question that the audience member asked, I mean, I think that's a part of it too. As you're planning, scale it down, even more scaled than you probably were inclined to.
And I will add to that too. We, in addition to scaling it down and looking into see what else we could do, we have started to film our performances so that we will be able to offer them digitally, so that individuals won't necessarily have to risk the safety or have to come again. As we've all said, it's a chance to be flexible and to see what works and what doesn't work.
So it brings to mind a question. These are all great words of wisdom, and where have you encountered resistance in your work? Where have there been hurdles through this time? I think that everybody is encountering, it's a lot of change. There's a lot of environmental hostility. What are some of the challenges that you've had to overcome, either previous, before heading into the crises, as well as currently, and have those changed?
I think that we need to look within ourselves. I think some of the resistance, and I think what everyone was saying about scaling, and that you need to stop, and that you need to take care of yourselves, and that you need to, we need to take care of ourselves and each other, and that we need to give people the grace to say, I can't do this right now. I need to step away from Zoom. I need to step away from, but to really stop and think about the healing that needs to happen as well. And I think as someone like myself who's used to doing and working, so it takes effort to say no, step back, also let other people, take the time to find their way around this new way of working. And I think, when I think about the resistance, I think of that internal resistance that we have, that drive that we always have to do more, all the time. But hey, let's take a breath and let's really think about what we're doing and think about ourselves.
That's a very good point. I think too that we have to realize that we are all still learning. This has been a year in which the models and the formulas and the plans that we have all been able to execute in the past and know that you do A, B, C, you're going to get D, that doesn't exist anymore. So recognizing that everyone is learning, everyone is doing something different, and it's okay. It's okay to recognize that it may or may not be successful, but you've just got to reach out there and try it and do.
We have a question, let's see, from David Lozana. I've got a question about President Trump's executive order on combating race and sex stereotyping. Does the panel have any advice for organizations that center racial equity and racial healing?
Hello, David. Thanks for the question. Yes, we were very concerned about that executive order and how it would impact the National Endowment for the Arts, the National Endowment for Humanities, and others. And at this, there was a call last week with Marianne Carter, the chair of the National Endowment for the Arts, and she really said that I guess their council is looking at that, and right now nothing is changing at within the agency. And from what we understood, is I spoke to the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, understood that it would not really impact organizations that were doing that kind of training or that kind of programming. But it's still, it's yet to be seen how it will impact and how much energy and effort the administration will put on this executive order. It is really, it's alarming that they would, put this in place. But I think the folks and the council at the NEA are really doing a good job of trying to mitigate, any impact that it would have on our organizations. But there's a solution, and it happens on November 3rd.
Maria, would you share just a summary of this executive order? I haven't heard
It was
of it.
issued back, I think it was in September, and from the administration that the agencies, could not engage in this type of diversity training that talked about maybe even white privilege or any kind of anything that addressed, really racism and privilege, because, it would be insulting to those that have the white privilege. So in essence, it was that you had to limit the diversity training, and that there were words and things that you couldn't use as you were doing that kind of training. I can send it to you, Deanna. I can email you the executive order. And when it came out, it was like it's atrocious what they're doing.
You could copy me on that too. I would appreciate it.
Okay. Yes, I'll get your email, Kathy, from Zanny.
I think about, regardless of how we're able to talk about issues, the work still needs to happen. And what's the extent to which, were this enforced, that the ability to move forward with creating equity through our actions can help to mitigate somewhat the intended desire to kind of diminish the way we're able to speak about inequity. Thinking about organizations that up till now have really felt like they are staring into the headlights, feel somewhat paralyzed by all of the turbulence going on, feeling defeated. What do you recommend as kind of a first foot forward of how, as an organization, given everything that's going on, have conversations about relevance, relationships, reimagining? What kind of advice would you offer to organizations that are looking for a way to move forward?
I think one of the first steps is to follow your heart. Most organizations are successful and making a difference now because they have a yearning, they have a sincere desire to accomplish whatever that is that organization has set out as its mission. And my advice is to have no fear in doing that, realizing that there are no certain answers now. So don't be afraid to reach out to others, to talk about what you see as your problems, to see if they have solutions, but be open, be honest, and don't be fearful as you approach it. That's my first step. If you look at your heart, then you'll see you're being guided by your heart in some direction or another. Be willing to follow that and don't be afraid.
Other thoughts, Maria or Deanna?
Sure. I would suggest taking an assessment of who cares about this work aside from us. Those of us doing the work, those of us on the board of directors of the organization doing the work, those of us that are donors of the work. Who else cares about the work? And then I would ask, what do they want and need right now? And how might we start a conversation with that community of folk that ask them, what do you want and what do you need? And then what can we provide, right? Because generally speaking, you talk to folks and you say, well, what do you want and what do you need? And folks give you a lot of stuff, most of it which isn't anything that you can actually provide. Like we're a visual art organization. So a lot of the things we can't do anything about. But listening and then coming back and saying, what do we do really well? What is the lane that we are in this ecosystem, in this place that we're at? And then how can we do the hell out of it? That's the way I think about it with my team. Get clear on what we do really, really well, and then do the hell out of it. And align that with what folks say they want and need.
Yeah.
Great advice. Great advice.
And again, I think always looking around and saying, really evaluating and assessing, how you have been doing this work and who is not there and who has not, been served by this and who doesn't have the opportunity to learn more about the exciting work that you're doing within the organization. And, just time to step forward and talk to people who don't think like you, who don't look like you, and invite them to the table, whether it's in your hiring, whether it's, the kind of work that you present. Look around and be more inclusive of others, and don't be fearful of community.
We had another question. Let's see. Robin Flatt. We find resistance from the unions, which can't agree regarding flexibility and streaming. I wish we could all really visit how we can best serve rather than who owns who. Robin. Mm-hmm. Certainly there are restrictions. Yes, I wish we really can have conversations about what are some of these barriers that organizations want to be able to provide some sorts of programming and for different reasons are not able to do so at this point in time. I think some of those are going to be long conversations that it's a new reality for everyone of figuring out the patience to navigate, how do you get from the way we used to do things to how they be done in the future?
The unions can pose a particular challenge. We work with unions at the Atlanta Opera, and we are thankful that we just renegotiated a contract. So our timing was good in terms of having discussions with the unions. But we have some of our sister opera companies that are really hurting as a result of past union contracts that have been in place for years, and they cannot renew them, and they have to meet those constraints. So I don't have an easy answer or easy comment to make regarding the unions, except again, hit it head on and be open and front in terms of these are the items, this is what we need, this is what will help us all be successful, trying to create a collaborative environment to the extent that you can.
Mm-hmm. And there's another question. Let's see, Katie Nicholson. What does the future of the performing arts look like to you all? Large gatherings won't be a reality for a while, but that live interaction between the audience and the performers is what creates those transformative experiences. Small gatherings aren't financially sustainable without broad underwriting. At what point do we see organizations fade away? What's the tipping point, and when will that happen? Thank you, Katie. It's a question, I think, on just about everyone's mind right now. Panelists, do you have some words of wisdom, some thoughts in response to Katie's question?
I'd love to have a crystal ball, Katie, and I could answer that. Obviously, we don't know, and I've said many times, so I'll stop talking and repeating the same thing. But what we've done at the Atlanta Opera is to have smaller crowds, have an outdoor venue where we're not in the closed building with thousands of people, and we take it a step at a time. As Deanna mentioned earlier, looking at a short-term plan and a long-term plan, we see this is working, then what can we do next? Relying on your creativity and your desire to present the arts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And
what are you seeing within the organizations that you serve?
Well, I mean, it's we're building, we're all building and learning as we move forward, but the fact that our institutions, our organizations are generally smaller organizations, and we have the bigger flagship organizations that have the bigger budgets, but they're fewer and far between. So there needs to be more building of the infrastructure to build the capacity and to stabilize organizations, and it may be that I don't know what will happen to the larger institutions, but I think they need to be willing to sit at the table and say, hey, you know what, this does have to change. More you need to build infrastructure of human resources, capacity, technology, the ability to serve our community and to look at it as service, as an intermediary or a service organization, we look at the service to our field, but I think that our organizations are struggling right now, especially Latinx and organizations of color. We don't have the luxury of having generations of support as many of the larger institutions have, but we need to build. So as perhaps others are shifting, some of our organizations are building.
It calls to mind a question of, one of the three R's that we're talking about today is relationships. And I know we've spoken a lot about, building deep relationships with community. Deanna's point about, who's going to care when you reopen, and Maria, who are you serving when you reopen? What about relationships that are about, levering partnerships? Others that, if you're concerned about, size and scope and scale of programming, how can relationships help you to think in new ways about how you deliver what you deliver? Have any of you seen any examples of this, or have thoughts to share about the importance of strategic relationships at this point in time?
Our relationships have been strategically worked with school systems in terms of audience development and creating opportunities. And with the virtual environment, we're able to reach out to school children now in ways that we could not as easily before. But the partnerships have always been critical, whether they be with the school systems or even supporters and organizations that are wanting to see the arts. We, as I mentioned earlier, the Jewish Breonna Heritage Museum, just identifying ways to collaborate so that it's not, in a partnership and a collaboration, not something that where you just get what you want, but looking to see what the need is in the community or with other organizations, and how you can come together and you both find a situation in which you win, and it's progressive that you can move forward.
Deanna, other thoughts?
Sure. I would just share in Minneapolis, the Walker Art Center, which is one of the big 15 here, is partnering with BIPOC-led small and mid-sized arts organizations by making a $10,000 grant. I believe it's 10 organizations that are getting a $10,000 grant from the Walker to commission 1 to 2 artists at those BIPOC organizations to create work that will then be on exhibit in a Walker gallery. So again, it's not perfect. One of the things that one bit of feedback that we've provided to the Walker is that they need to put a little bit of a frame around these commissions, that the artists that have been chosen by the BIPOC organizations would appreciate an opportunity to be in community with each other. And also would really benefit from understanding what kind of resources they may have access to at the Walker Art Center. So we're helping them think about how to shape this partnership into something that'll be truly meaningful, because their instinct was right in let's get some resources out into these communities. But they didn't think it fully through. They were just like, we're going to give you some money to do some things and come in and use our space. So I think being open to having conversations with people about partnerships too, so that you're developing a win-win-win scenario that often people aren't able to see on their own, right?
Yeah, and I love that, Deanna. There has to be a deeper relationships. And I like to think, I like participatory grant making, and I think as you develop programs, why not that participatory curating or, creating of programs to include other voices, so that it is something that is you build something that is more inclusive, and you have buy-in and participation from a very diverse community.
There's a question that I see in the chat that I want to share, and it's from Greg Ortel. And as we all pivot as organizations, how do you mitigate staff burnout, fatigue, general exhaustion from the pressures of the pandemic and election? How are you seeing this within your own organizations? How are you seeing it within the organizations that you serve?
Yes, we're seeing it within our own organizations. And again, to take that time to heal. And we are working with a Catalyst for Change grant program with the Cerdna Foundation, and we're supporting some artists. And I love the way that Cerdna has positioned care and healing of the artists. So within the budget, artists, of course, need to pay themselves, but also need to put in line items, whether it is for childcare or for their health care, things that normally you don't see in budgets, so to give people the freedom to be able to take that there is an opportunity for for them to step back and take care of themselves.
We are going to have a shutdown, if you will, after this festival of performances is over. From November 20th through November 30th, we will basically just take off because everyone has been working around the clock, nonstop for so many months now. And as Maria mentioned, so many different stresses, it may be childcare, it may be someone sick in your family, or just doing the work that you have to do while trying to balance everything else. So we are encouraging no emails, no touch base, let's just shut down and everybody breathe for 10 days. And that, of course, is during the time of Thanksgiving, and people want to focus on family and other things too. So, but that's how we're going to address it, just to give ourselves a chance to rejuvenate.
Mm-hmm.
Nice, Kathy. And can I just ditto Kathy's comment in that requiring the team to take off is different than saying, well, you can take off if you need it, right? Because then that can create a sense of trepidation for an employee, because like, if I take off, is that going to be looked at poorly by my supervisor or by senior leadership? So I think the philosophy around requiring a shutdown for an extended period of time in 10 days, that's amazing. That's a good amount of time is the way to go. I know a lot of organizations here in Minnesota are closing for Election Day next week. The entire organization is closing. The McKnight Foundation is allowing everyone to take off for the day. Also, some organizations I know are extending summer hours, whereas folks had Fridays off during the summer. Many organizations in Minnesota do this. They're extending that indefinitely. So Fridays off period, through the end of the year, maybe even. So thinking about those things you can do that force people to rest and take time off. And then I would also say by senior leadership, the CEO, the president, demonstrating that which we are asking our staff to do by actually taking off and not sending emails and not sending texts and not responding when people reach out when you're on vacation. I think those things go a long way.
Great words of wisdom and great examples. There was another question, I believe. Let's see. It's from Ryan Glenn. From whom or what are you deriving inspiration from in this season to dig deep into your work?
For me, I get inspired by artists. I really do. And I get inspired by the elders in our community who have so much wisdom to share. And we just need to stop and take time to listen.
I get inspired by nature and the life that is around us. If we just stop and listen. And right now you may not be able to hear, but there's a bird outside of my window that is out there just tweeting and enjoying, and being able to soak up the goodness that is in the world around us on a daily basis. I will take a personal note and say that my mom is now suffering from dementia, and she's 92 years old. So she doesn't remember a lot or say a lot, but she has said, do something you enjoy every day. She said, if it's nothing but get a Snickers bar and sit back, do something that you enjoy so that you can be inspired, you can become creative, you can appreciate the good that is around us all the time if we just stop and look at it and listen to it.
Beautiful.
It calls to mind some advice that had been given by someone who had had a son commit suicide. You know, that was in a really profound place of just stop every day and think what's going to be the highlight of today, and be mindful throughout the day of when that moment comes. And you may have multiple times, but it is, to your point, the sense of being connected and finding inspiration from being present.
You know, and I would add to that question, Zani. I've been really inspired by DJs and by performers, musicians in particular, who during the pandemic have taken their craft, their gift, and put it on the internet and helped us all feel better connected, I think, in a way that wasn't the case before the pandemic. So I'm thinking about, I don't know if any of you all listening know or followed DJ D Nice, who had dance parties every week for a good chunk of the pandemic when we were first in the thick of it and realizing, oh, this isn't just going to be a couple weeks kind of thing. And then there's also been quite a few performers and comedians as well who have started doing direct to consumer offerings where for $5 or for $10, you pay a fee and then you can see a live concert by Erykah Badu or Toby Nwege, who's actually from Houston. So just those, leaning into the moment and pivoting, so to speak, and then figuring out how to take advantage of this opportunities. I'm super inspired by it. They didn't get stuck. They said, let me bring out my turntables and stream it on Instagram because, the world needs that right now.
Yeah, and I have to add, young people, I mean, so many new ideas, and as they think about, taking that big jump into the future and letting them lead, let them lead. They have so much to offer.
Yeah. But in transitioning, because we only have like 2 minutes, some final thoughts about, I see a question that I want to be able to just pose. It's better than the question that I was going to ask. And that's, what changes made during the pandemic will you carry with you once it's over? Do you think organizations consider slowing down or have become over-programmed? Quick responses from everyone. What will you carry with you?
Go ahead.
Sure. Thank you, Kathy. I think two things. The new sort of permeability between personal, professional, that requires us to be a little more trusting and a little more integrated in how we engage with each other. I'm sitting at my kitchen table right now having a conversation with amazing leaders from all over the country. I think that is something that I'll take with me, and I think that's something that's going to that makes us healthier. And then to the question directly, yeah, I think slowing down, sort of right sizing and being okay with a smaller number of things being enough.
Great. Thank you, Deanna. Kathy?
I think being flexible is what we will learn. I am someone who normally plans out a day, has a to-do list all of the time that needs to be checked off, and won't stop until it's all done and taking A, B, C, D, E as it should be. But now in this pandemic situation, the to-do sometimes is just thrown out the door because you can't do what it is you needed to do. So being flexible is what I will take forward, and realizing that the best opportunities come at the moment, and I can sense them from within. And so looking inwardly and listening to the inward movements and suggestions that say, this is what you should do, this is what you would, listening to that inner voice is something I will take with me and never put down.
Great. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Kathy, Maria?
I agree with everything that's been said, that, you know, looking inside, you know, and looking into the spirit that we all carry, you know, and taking time to understand that we're part of something much larger than just ourselves.
Well, the three of you have been such inspirations throughout this morning's discussion, and you've left us with such rich thoughts to reflect on, related to the relevance of our work and the relationships here in North Texas, as well as to how we can take steps towards reimagining a future. I want to thank TACA, and I would like to ask everyone once again through a chat storm to kind of get on your feet and thank the panelists who are fabulous, along with my fellow TACA Perforum panelists who are Megan Bowden-Wilkinson, Zanetta Drew, Gwen Eccles, Lauren Embry, Anne-Marie Gann, Megan Heber, Amy Lewis-Hofflin, Suzanne Smith, Jeremy Strick, Clyde Valentine, Donna Wilhelm, Jeff Woodward, Terry Loftus, Greg Artell, Morris Scheffler. Thank you all for such an inspiring conversation. What a joy to be able to spend an hour and a half on a Monday morning thinking, where do we take it from here? And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Terry.
Our thanks to Kathy, Deanna, Maria for being with us today, for joining us on this Perforum 2020 on relevance, relationships, and reimagining. A very special thanks to Zani for leading the discussion. We are deeply grateful to you all. If you're interested in learning more about TACA and our mission, please visit our website at taca-arts.org. Our mission is made possible through the support of individuals just like you. So if you feel compelled to make a donation, I encourage you to do so. Thank you all for joining us today. We wish you a safe and healthy fall season. Goodbye.